I owned half the city, but on my birthday, not a single soul dared to say my name. The house was too quiet for a celebration, too clean, too perfect, like a museum no one was allowed to touch, and I stood in the center of it all with a glass of whiskey I hadn't taken a sip from, watching the skyline stretch beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, every light out there belonging to someone who feared me, respected me, needed me, but none of them knowing me, not really, not the way it mattered, not the way a birthday was supposed to feel, and somewhere in the back of my mind I wondered when exactly silence had become the loudest thing in my life, when power had started to sound like emptiness, when a day that used to mean something had turned into just another number on a calendar no one acknowledged unless I told them to, and I never did, because in my world, men like me didn't celebrate. We endured, we controlled, we moved forward, but tonight the control felt thinner, like something fragile stretched too tight, and even the men stationed throughout the house, dressed in black, moving with quiet precision, avoided looking at me longer than necessary, as if eye contact might break whatever invisible rule had settled over the evening. And that was when I heard it, not loud, not dramatic, just a small, misplaced sound that didn't belong in a house like mine, the soft clatter of something falling, followed by a whisper of panic, a child's voice trying to stay quiet and failing, and it cut through the silence sharper than anything else in the room, making my grip tighten slightly around the glass as I turned my head toward the hallway where the sound came from. My instincts already calculating, already assessing, but something else stirred beneath that, something unfamiliar, something I hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. And when I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the way I always moved when something unexpected entered my space, I saw them. Not what I expected, not a threat, not a mistake that needed correcting, just a woman standing, frozen beside a cleaning cart, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that comes from knowing you're somewhere you don't belong, and beside her, two small figures, a little girl clutching a paper bag, like it was something precious, and a boy half hidden behind her leg, both of them staring up at me with wide eyes that held no fear, just confusion. And that was what stopped me, because fear I understood, fear was predictable, controllable, but this quiet innocence standing in the middle of my carefully controlled world, it didn't fit. It didn't follow any of the rules I'd built my life on. And for a moment, no one moved, not the guards behind me, not the woman trying to find the right words, not even me, because something about the way the girl held that bag, careful, protective, like it mattered more than anything else in the room, made the silence feel different, less empty, and more like something waiting to be filled. The woman lowered her eyes first, her voice barely above a whisper as she pulled the children closer to her sides. I am so sorry, sir. They were not supposed to make any noise. And there it was. That word, sir, the distance it created, the invisible wall it rebuilt between me and them. Something safe, something familiar. And yet the little girl did not seem to understand that wall at all, because she stepped forward before the woman could stop her, small sneakers squeaking softly against the polished marble floor as she held the paper bag up toward me with both hands, like an offering she believed I might actually accept, and I found myself staring at it instead of her, at the uneven fold of the top, at the faint grease stains seeping through the bottom, at the way her fingers tightened slightly, as if she was afraid I might refuse, and behind me I could feel the shift in the room, the guards waiting for a signal, for a correction, for me to restore order the way I always did, but I did not move. I did not speak, because something about the way she stood there, unafraid, uncalculated, was breaking through the script everyone else followed around me. It is for you, she said, her voice bright, certain, as if there was no world where I would not take it. And I realized then that no one had ever handed me something without expecting something in return, not in years, maybe not ever. And that realization settled in my chest heavier than any threat ever had. The boy peeked out from behind the woman's leg, eyes flicking between my face and the bag, curious, cautious, but not afraid. And that word again echoed in my mind, not afraid, like they had not been taught who I was, what I represented. And for the first time in a long time I wondered what it would feel like to be seen without all of that, without the weight of reputation pressing down on every interaction. And my hand moved before I fully decided to let it, fingers closing around the edge of the bag, careful, slower than I had ever taken anything in my life, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever this moment was. And when I lifted it slightly, the scent reached me first, sugar, cheap frosting, something simple, something real, and I felt something shift again, subtle but undeniable, the kind of shift that does not ask permission. The woman's breath caught. I heard it, soft but sharp, like she was bracing for a reaction she could not predict, and I finally looked at her, really looked, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet strength in the way she held herself together despite clearly having nothing, and then back at the children, who were watching me like this was the most normal thing in the world, like handing a stranger a cake on a night like this made perfect sense, and for a moment I did not know what to say, which was rare, almost unheard of. Words had always been my weapon, my tool, my control, but now they felt unnecessary or maybe insufficient, and the silence stretched again, but it was different this time, not empty, not cold, just waiting, and I heard my own voice, lower than usual, quieter, less certain. What is inside? And the girl smiled, immediate, unguarded, like she had been waiting for that question all along. A birthday cake, she said, like it was obvious, like it was simple, like it was enough. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Simple, almost innocent, and yet it landed somewhere deep, somewhere I had not allowed anything to reach in years. A birthday cake, not custom made, not ordered, not delivered by someone paid to perform a task, but carried in a paper bag by a child who believed that was enough, and I realized I was still holding it like it might disappear if I moved too quickly, like it was something fragile instead of something small and imperfect. And when I opened the bag, slowly, deliberately, the room seemed to hold its breath with me, the guards behind me still, the woman frozen, the children leaning forward just slightly, and inside was exactly what she said, a small cake, uneven frosting, the edges not quite smooth, a single candle pressed into the center at a slight angle, like it had been placed there by hands that cared more about meaning than precision, and I stared at it longer than necessary, because something about it felt unfamiliar in a way I could not immediately name. Not the cake itself, but what it represented, effort without obligation, kindness without calculation, and I heard myself exhale quietly, something I had not realized I was holding in. We made it, the girl added quickly, as if she needed me to understand that detail, as if that changed everything. And maybe it did, because it meant time, it meant intention, it meant that somewhere outside of this house, outside of my world, someone had decided that I was worth that effort without even knowing me. And that thought settled in my chest heavier than anything else that night. The boy stepped a little closer now, his voice softer, almost hesitant. We did not have much, but my sister said birthdays should still have cake, and I felt something tighten in my chest at that, something unfamiliar and unwelcome and impossible to ignore, because in my world, everything had a price, everything was measured, weighed, negotiated. But this had no price, no condition, no expectation attached to it. And I did not know how to respond to something like that. I did not know what version of myself was supposed to stand here and accept it. The man who controlled everything, or the one who suddenly felt like he had nothing that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I chose silence, not as control, but because I needed it, because I needed a second to understand why this small, imperfect cake felt more significant than anything else I had been given in years. And when I finally looked up from it, my eyes moved between them, the woman still tense, waiting for a reaction she feared, the children still hopeful, waiting for one they believed would come. And I realized then that this moment was not about power, not about control, not about maintaining the distance I had built so carefully over time. It was about something simpler, something I had forgotten how to recognize, and my voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all night, stripped of the weight it usually carried. What are your names? And the girl smiled again. Immediate, bright, like that was the easiest question in the world. I am Lily, and this is my brother Noah, she said, pointing proudly. And for a moment, just a moment, the house did not feel so empty anymore. Her name settled into the room differently than anything else had that night. Light, unguarded, real, Lily, and the boy, Noah, and I repeated them silently in my head as if committing them to memory mattered, as if I might lose something if I did not. And I realized I had not asked anyone their name without already knowing it in years, Information usually came to me before introductions ever happened, filtered, verified, delivered. But this was direct, simple, human, and it shifted. Something again, subtle but steady. The woman finally spoke, her voice careful, controlled. "My name is Emily," she said, and I could hear the hesitation in it, the uncertainty of how much space she was allowed to take in a room like this, and I nodded once, acknowledging it, not dismissing it. And that alone seemed to surprise her more than anything else, because her shoulders lowered just slightly, like a tension she had been holding began to ease without her permission, and behind me I felt the movement of one of my men stepping forward, quiet but deliberate, the unspoken reminder of protocol, of boundaries, of how things were supposed to work in this house. And I did not turn. I did not need to. I could feel it, the expectation, the silent question, what now? And for the first time that night, I did not have an immediate answer that fit the version of me they all knew, because this moment did not belong to that version. It belonged to something else, something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. And I found myself looking back down at the cake, at the single candle leaning slightly to one side, and I realized something almost absurd. There was no lighter, no match, nothing prepared, because no one had expected this, not them, not me. And before I could say anything, Lily reached into her pocket, small fingers pulling out a crumpled object she held up with quiet pride, a disposable lighter, bright blue, scratched from use, and she stepped closer again, closing the distance without hesitation, without asking permission. "We brought one," she said, like that solved everything, like she had anticipated a problem I had not even considered, and I stared at it for a second longer than necessary, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant, preparation, thought, intention, all for someone they did not know. And I realized then that this was not accidental. This was not just a child handing me something on impulse. This was planned, in their own small way, in their own world. They had decided this mattered, and that realization pressed against something in my chest I had spent years keeping sealed. And when I finally reached out and took the lighter from her hand, my fingers brushed hers briefly, warm, steady, unafraid, and I struck it once, the flame flickering to life with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. And as I held it to the candle, watching the small wick catch and glow, I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting, expecting something, a reaction, a command, a dismissal. But none of that came, because in that moment, standing there with a child's cake and a borrowed flame, I was not thinking about control or power or reputation. I was thinking about how long it had been since anything this simple had felt this significant. And when the candle burned steady, I pulled my hand back slowly, the flame dancing in the center of the uneven frosting, and Lily looked up at me expectantly, her smile softening into something quieter, something more certain. "You are supposed to make a wish," she said, like it was a rule I had somehow forgotten, and maybe I had. The words lingered in the air, simple and unquestioned, like a rule the world had agreed on without ever needing to explain, and I found myself staring at the small flame instead of answering her, watching it flicker gently above the uneven wax, steady despite how fragile it looked. And for a moment I could not remember the last time anyone had told me to make a wish, not as a joke, not as a transaction, but as something that actually mattered. And I realized then that I did not even know what I would wish for, because everything I had ever wanted, I had already taken, built, or controlled. And yet standing there, with a child waiting for me to follow a tradition I had long outgrown, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest, something that did not come from power or money or influence, something quieter, something that asked instead of demanded. And I closed my eyes, not because I believed in wishes, but because she believed in them. And somehow that felt like enough. And in that brief darkness behind my eyes, the city disappeared, the house disappeared, the expectations disappeared, and what remained was a strange, unexpected thought that surfaced without effort, not about gaining more, not about securing anything, but about holding on to this moment, this strange, quiet, unguarded space that should not have existed in my world but somehow did. And when I opened my eyes again, the flame still burned steady, waiting, patient, and I leaned forward slightly, exhaling just enough to extinguish it, watching as the light vanished into a thin trail of smoke that curled upward and disappeared into the air. And the silence that followed was different again, not heavy, not empty, just full, like something had shifted into place without anyone announcing it. And then Lily clapped softly, once, twice, her smile widening like she had been certain all along that I would do it. And Noah followed, his small hand slower, but just as certain, and the sound echoed gently in the vast space, softer than anything that had ever filled these walls, but somehow more real. And I felt the corner of my mouth move before I could stop it. Not a full smile, not something I recognized easily, but something close enough that it surprised even me. And Emily noticed it too. I saw it in the way her expression changed, cautious but hopeful, like she was witnessing something she had not expected to see. And for a second longer than necessary, no one spoke, because words would have broken it, would have forced it back into something structured and controlled. And I realized I did not want that. Not yet. And when I finally straightened, setting the lighter down on the nearest surface without thinking, my voice came quieter than before, steadier in a different way. "We should not let it go to waste," I said, nodding slightly toward the cake, and Lily's face lit up instantly, like that was the answer she had been waiting for, like this had always been the next step, and she looked back at Emily, who hesitated just a fraction of a second before giving a small nod, permission, trust, something fragile passing between them. And in that moment, I understood something I had not allowed myself to understand before, that this was not about the cake, not about the candle, not even about the birthday. It was about being seen, without fear, without expectation, without the weight of everything I had built standing between me and the people in front of me. And as I reached for the small plastic knife tucked awkwardly into the side of the cake, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was not alone in this house. The plastic knife felt almost out of place in my hand, light, flimsy, nothing like the tools I was used to holding. And yet the way Lily watched me made it feel like it carried more weight than anything else in the room, her eyes fixed on every movement, as if this moment mattered more than it should. And I realized I did not want to rush it, did not want to reduce it to something careless. So I pressed the blade gently into the soft frosting, feeling it give way with almost no resistance. And for a second I hesitated, not because I did not know how to cut a cake, but because I had not done something this ordinary in a very long time. And that realization lingered as I finished the first slice, uneven but careful, lifting it slightly before setting it down on the small piece of cardboard they had used as a base. And Lily leaned forward instantly, her hands clasped together like she had been waiting her entire life for this exact moment, while Noah watched with quiet focus, his attention fixed on the cake like it might disappear if he looked away. And Emily stood just behind them, still, composed, but I could see it in her eyes, the disbelief, the quiet confusion, like she was trying to understand how this situation had not turned into something else, something harsher, something colder. And I realized she was waiting for the shift, for me to return to the version of myself she expected, the one who did not pause, who did not soften, who did not share. And I understood why, because that was the man the world knew, the man I had allowed them to see. But standing here now, with a small cake and 2 children who had never learned to fear me, I found that version harder to reach, like it was further away than it should have been. And when I held the slice out, instinctively offering it to Lily first, she hesitated only for a second before taking it carefully with both hands, her fingers brushing mine again, steady, unshaken, and she smiled. Not wide this time, not loud, but soft, genuine, like this was exactly how things were supposed to be. And something about that settled deeper than anything else had that night. And I cut another slice, this one slightly smaller, handing it to Noah, who accepted it with a quiet nod, his eyes flicking up to meet mine briefly before returning to the cake. And I noticed the way he held it, careful, like it was something valuable, something not to be wasted. And that detail stayed with me longer than I expected, because it spoke of a life very different from mine. A life where small things mattered in ways I had forgotten. And when I finally cut a third piece, I paused again, glancing toward Emily, who immediately shook her head slightly, almost automatically. "It is for you," she said, her voice low, respectful, like she was reminding me of something I already knew. And I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, recognizing the distance she was trying to maintain, the boundary she believed needed to stay intact. And without breaking that, I sat the piece down beside the others instead of handing it directly to her. A quiet adjustment, a small acknowledgement, and then I stepped back just slightly, creating space, not because I had to, but because I chose to, and as the children began to eat, small bites, careful, savoring each one, their quiet enjoyment filling the room in a way no grand celebration ever had, I realized something that felt both simple and impossible at the same time, that this unplanned, imperfect moment was more real than anything I could have arranged, and for the first time in years, the silence in my house did not feel empty, it felt alive. The sound of quiet chewing should not have meant anything, but it did, soft, steady, almost rhythmic, and it filled the space in a way that conversations never had in this house. No tension, no calculation, just presence, and I found myself watching them longer than I intended, noticing the way Lily took small bites like she wanted to make it last, the way Noah carefully scraped the frosting with the edge of the plastic knife as if nothing should be wasted, and each detail landed somewhere deeper than it should have, because it was honest, unfiltered, untouched by the world I operated in, and for a moment I let myself stay there, observing instead of controlling, something I had not done in years, and it felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable, just different, like stepping into a version of reality I had never allowed myself to experience, and then I felt it, the shift behind me again, more deliberate this time, heavier, the quiet signal that the moment had gone on long enough. That lines were beginning to blur, and I knew without turning that one of my men had stepped closer, waiting for instruction, waiting for me to restore the structure that kept everything in place, and for a brief second I considered it, ending this, sending them away, returning everything to how it was supposed to be, clean, controlled, predictable, but the thought did not sit right, not anymore, not after what had just happened, and when I finally turned, meeting his eyes, I saw the question. There, unspoken but clear, and I answered it just as quietly, a slight shake of my head, a decision made without explanation, and he stepped back immediately, understanding without needing more, because that was how things worked, but this was not how things usually worked, and I was aware of that, aware of how unusual it was to let something continue without purpose or gain, and yet I did, because something in me did not want it to end yet, and when I turned back, Emily was watching me now, really watching, not just cautious, but searching, like she was trying to understand the same thing my men had already accepted. What kind of man stands in a room like this and allows this moment to exist? And I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary before looking away, not because I could not meet it, but because I did not have an answer that fit into words, and that in itself was new. And Lily broke the silence again, her voice softer this time, almost thoughtful. "Do you always have your birthday like this?" she asked, and the question landed without weight, without judgment, just curiosity, and I almost answered the way I always would have, with something controlled, something distant, but the words did not come, because the truth felt closer than anything else in that moment, and I found myself saying it before I could reconsider. No one usually comes, and as soon as the words left my mouth, the room shifted again, quieter, deeper, because it was not a statement of fact, it was something else, something more exposed than I was used to allowing, and Lily tilted her head slightly, thinking about it in that simple way children do, before nodding once, like she had reached a conclusion I had not. "Then it is good we did," she said, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just certainty. And for the first time that night, I did not question it, I did not analyze it. I simply let it exist, because somehow, without planning it, without controlling it, without even understanding how it had happened, she was right. Her certainty stayed with me longer than anything else she had said, not loud, not forceful, just simple and absolute, like a truth she did not feel the need to defend, and I found myself nodding slightly without thinking, as if acknowledging something I had been avoiding for years, and the room settled again into that quiet rhythm, the kind that did not demand attention but held it anyway. And I realized I had not checked the time, had not looked at my phone, had not given a single instruction, since they walked in, which in itself was something that would have been unthinkable any other night, and yet nothing was falling apart, nothing was out of control. If anything, this moment felt more stable than the carefully constructed routines I usually relied on, And that thought lingered as I leaned slightly against the edge of the table, not out of exhaustion, but out of something closer to ease, and I watched as Lily finished her slice, carefully wiping a bit of frosting from her fingers with a napkin she had taken from the cart, her movements deliberate, respectful, like she understood she was in someone else's space even if she was not afraid of it. And Noah followed a moment later, slower, more focused, making sure there was nothing left before setting the cardboard piece down, and Emily stepped forward quietly, gathering the small bits they had used, her movements efficient but gentle, like she was trying not to disturb something fragile that had formed between us. And for a second I thought she might say something, apologize again, explain, justify, but she did not. She simply worked, and that restraint told me more than words would have, and I found myself speaking before the moment slipped away. You should not be working this late, I said, my tone not accusatory, not commanding, just observational, and she paused, just slightly, before answering. I take what shifts I can get, her voice steady, honest, not defensive, and I studied her for a moment. The quiet strength in that answer, the lack of complaint, the acceptance of circumstances without surrendering to them. And it reminded me of something I had not thought about in years, the version of myself that existed before everything became what it is now. And I let that thought pass without holding on to it too tightly, because I knew where that path led. And instead I looked at the children again, at the way they stood close to her without clinging, secure, but independent. And I understood something then that had nothing to do with power or influence, that what she had given them mattered more than anything I could buy. And that realization shifted something quietly into place, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood, and I straightened slightly, my voice returning, not colder, but clearer, more certain in a different way. From now on, you will not work nights, I said, and I saw it immediately, the reaction, the confusion, the hesitation, the instinct to refuse before even understanding what I meant. And Emily shook her head almost instantly. I cannot afford to lose the hours, she said, quick, controlled, already preparing to protect what little stability she had. And I held her gaze, steady, not imposing, but not withdrawing either. You are not losing anything, I replied, and for a moment longer than necessary. The room held that exchange, quiet, balanced. Something new forming between what I offered and what she feared, and I did not push further, did not explain, did not force the decision, because I understood something now that I had not before, that not everything needed to be taken, some things needed to be given time to be accepted, and as I stepped back, giving her space the same way she had given it to me, I realized that this night, this unexpected interruption, had already changed something fundamental, not in the world I controlled, but in the part of me that had been untouched by it for far too long. She did not answer right away, and I did not expect her to, because I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the careful weighing of risk and trust, of what accepting something like that from a man like me might mean for her, and for the two children standing beside her. And I respected that hesitation more than immediate agreement would have given me, because it meant she understood the world enough to question it, and yet had not let it harden her completely, and that balance was rare, rarer than anything money could buy. And the silence stretched just long enough to feel real before she finally spoke, her voice quieter now, less guarded but still careful. I will think about it, she said, and it was not a refusal, not acceptance, just honesty, and I nodded once, because that was enough, more than enough for something that had not even existed an hour ago, and I stepped back another half step, creating a clear space between us, not distance, but respect, something I realized I had not offered freely in a very long time. And Lily looked between us, her small face thoughtful as if she was trying to understand something much bigger than she could name, before she reached for Emily's hand, a simple gesture, grounding, and Noah followed without hesitation, instinctively close. And for a moment the three of them stood together in a way that made everything else in the room feel secondary, like the rest of it, the house, the guards, the city outside, was just background to something far more important, and I watched them longer than I intended, committing the image to memory without fully understanding why. And then Emily gave a small nod, more to herself than to me, before gently guiding the children back toward the cart, her movements returning to something more familiar, more structured, but not entirely the same as before. Something had shifted there too. I could see it in the way she no longer avoided looking at me completely. And as she gathered the last of their things, Lily turned back one more time, her voice softer now, but just as certain as before. "Thank you for letting us stay," she said. And I felt the weight of that word, letting, as if I had given something when, in reality, I had received far more than I had allowed. And I inclined my head slightly, a gesture that felt more natural than words in that moment. And Noah followed her lead with a small wave, hesitant but sincere, and I found myself returning it. A motion so unfamiliar it almost felt foreign, and as they moved toward the hallway, their footsteps light against the marble, the sound faded slower than it should have, like the house itself was reluctant to let it go. And when they finally disappeared from view, the silence returned. But it was not the same silence that had filled the night before they arrived. It was quieter, yes, but not empty, not hollow. It carried something with it now, something that lingered in the air and settled into the space they had left behind. And I remained where I was for a moment longer, looking at the table, at the small remnants of a cake that should not have mattered but somehow did. And I understood something then, something simple but impossible to ignore. That power could control many things, could shape outcomes, could bend the world into something predictable, but it could not create what had just happened. It could not force sincerity. It could not manufacture warmth. And as I finally turned back toward the windows, the city still stretching endlessly beyond them, I realized that for the first time in years, I was not thinking about what I owned, but about what I had almost forgotten how to feel. And that night, without asking for anything in return, they had given it back to me.